Dear RO viewers, welcome again to an episode of our podcast. Today we're going to be doing a little bit different presentation on what we've been doing with taxation. With us are John Richardson and James Gosart, and both of them have been very active over the past years, but more so James. James, give us a little bit of the history on how Republicans Overseas became involved with the taxation issue, and bring us back to those first years and what we accomplished back then.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And John, good to see you again. Jonathan, it's Republicans Overseas has been involved in advocacy for tax reform for Americans living abroad for about a decade. The Republicans Overseas was really founded in Hong Kong around 2012, 2013 timeframe. We inherited the organization from what used to be Republicans Abroad, and we reconstituted into a new organization. But it was really the Hong Kong chapter that led that, and I was living there at the time. Now, the first issue that we got involved in as an organization was FATCA, because it was around those years when FATCA, the law had been passed, and the implementation had been delayed. I think the law was passed in the Hires Act was passed in 2010, and implementation didn't take place until 2014. But as Republicans Overseas, we immediately saw the risk and the exposure to Americans abroad. And we got, in the early days, first of all, tremendous support from the Republican National Committee to pursue this as an aggressive policy to benefit all Americans living abroad. And the first was, in those years, is we initiated a legal action. We started a lawsuit against the Treasury Department and suing on the basis of the constitutionality of FATCA. And our claim was that there were, if I'm not mistaken, there were 6 violations of the Constitution that were embedded in the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act. And that's of course, taking on the Treasury, taking on a law like that in the courts is an enormously tough thing to be successful in. It did reach the Supreme Court. I believe it was 2015, and the Supreme Court declined to take the case. They would not grant it standing, and that case was sent back to the lower courts, and we lost. But that was the first action we took as a direct advocacy on behalf of Americans abroad. And later in 2017, with an incoming Republican Congress, we had an opportunity to conduct hearings in the House of Representatives. And so we very much drove the hearings that were held in April of 2017. John was an integral part of that. That's when he and I first started working together on this issue. And in 2017, we prepared a panel to testify in Congress. And the hearings were quite successful. Our points were made very aggressively. Our points were in support of the repeal of FATCA, the unconstitutionality of FATCA, the harm it does to Americans abroad, the compliance cost faced by not only Americans but by financial institutions, and the lack of success, the lack of revenue that the IRS really was pulling in. In that regard, the hearings were very successful. House of Representatives unfortunately never voted on that motion, but what it did do, Jonathan, is it gave us as Republicans Overseas a lot of credibility in Congress. That people knew that when we wanted to talk to a congressman or a senator about taxation, that we knew our stuff, that we weren't going to waste their time. We had our facts behind us. We knew who we were. We knew what we stood for, and we could help their staffs with the drafting of legislation or whatever. So those hearings, although not successful, they gave us credibility in talking to especially Republican congressmen and senators. And that relationship continues to this day, really. Then at about the same time, our relations with the Republican National Committee are quite strong. And the repeal of FATCA and the repeal of citizenship-based taxation then were embedded in the 2016 Republican Party platform. It was a huge statement of support for the plight of Americans abroad. And once again, this getting something like that in a platform doesn't guarantee anything, but it's a statement of values. It's a statement of where we stand, and it gives you something to build on. So that was 2016, very much the result of efforts by those of us in Republicans overseas who are supporting and working the issue. Then in 2019, that led to the holding bill, what later was named the tax fairness. Oh boy, the territorial taxation for Americans abroad, right?
I think
that was it, wasn't it, John? Yeah, that's right. So what gave us the opening for that legislation was that when the Tax Reform Act of 2017 was passed, the TJCA was passed, that had territorial taxation embedded in it for American corporations operating abroad. And our approach was to craft a similar legislation for individual Americans. And that's why that bill was written the way it was basically to go to Congress and say, look, you did this for corporate America. It was the right thing to do. It drove higher revenues from corporate America. It enabled the repatriation of hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more, hundreds of billions of dollars. But now it should be done for individuals. So that was the point behind that legislation and why it was crafted the way it is, the way it was. Unfortunately, Congressman Holding was not reelected, and that bill was never brought to the floor of Congress. But the bill also stood on its own, and that's in today's Congress. That's a risky thing to get standalone legislation passed through the House and the Senate. So the approach you're taking now, Jonathan, is really what we're most optimistic on. Is we're working with the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025. We are, although they have produced some results and some recommendations already, they have not produced recommendations on tax reform for 2025. We are early in the game in the paper that we have submitted to the Heritage Foundation in this whole crafting of what will that tax reform legislation look like. So that is why the paper that John is the principal author of, but there was about 8 or 9 of us, I think, that contributed to the paper and made edits and so forth. That is why that paper is written the way it is. It is a checklist, basically, or a cookbook for how can a committee staff or a congressional staff craft legislation that could be embedded in comprehensive tax reform in 2025. Well, we all know that tax reform is going to happen because the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to expire in 2025. Something has to replace it, and we're going to work like crazy to get the elements of this paper embedded in whatever legislation comes out, and that's the track that we are tracking now, Jonathan. And so really that's a couple of minute history of the key things that Republicans overseas has done in the last 10 years and how they all connect and how we've been fighting for the tax rights of Americans abroad.
Yes, we have been doing a lot of work on that. And I recall that our chapter here in Greece kicked off with our first conference in May of 2019, which was based on the precept of regional-based taxation and how we would offer our help. John was there. John, as I pass on the closing remarks to you, I just want to say that all the big chapters in Republicans Overseas have been working very hard to promote and to pass on the word that regional-based taxation is the only way to go, whereas citizen-based taxation is a root of all problems. John, could you wrap it up for us?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that citizenship-based taxation is a cancerous tumor that needs to be removed. Whatever might be interesting to add, though, I mean, I'm struck by, although I've known Jim since 2016, I guess, and I'm well aware of all the years of involvement that Jim and RO have had in this particular issue. It was certainly interesting to listen to the history, but Jim, I think it might be interesting for people to hear. I mean, where does your personal interest and passion come on for this issue? Anyway, I mean, there's a bit of a backstory here, I think, isn't there?
Well, thanks, John. Yeah, we've certainly been working for a number of years on this issue, and of course, your base of clients over the years has a huge range of issues that they've run into, and some of the issues for your clients are quite painful. But I guess for me, John, that I've seen the issue of how Americans abroad and how corporations and small businesses operating abroad, how those sort of three tiers are impacted by the unique and punishing laws that we impose on Americans, small businesses, and corporations abroad. So I've lived abroad for 26 years. More than half my career in corporate America. Most of that time was in Asia, first in Singapore, then later Hong Kong and Shanghai. But I've seen it when I first moved to Singapore. I was in my 20s, and I experienced it in those early years as a typical employee of a major corporation. I worked for GE, General Electric. Was transferred over and worked as an expatriate under the terms and conditions that most corporations would have for American employees that they would post abroad. And in those years, I got familiar with things like tax equalization, the studies done by consulting firms such as Hay and Mercer, and how American employees who are posted in similar situations as me. The terms under which we work, and you get a quick feel that because you're an American, you're a much higher cost burden to the corporation you're working for than your counterparts from either locally or anywhere else in the world, and it really gets down to taxation. So in a situation like that, you're always concerned that is my company going to repatriate me next month and send me back home because I cost too much, and so I experienced that really very early on in my 20s and saw how people in my situation deal with it. Now fast forward 20 years or so, and I was running a regional division of GE, one of the industrial businesses. In total, we had I'm guessing it was 1,500 employees in the region. A range of manufacturing, of technology, of sales, marketing, really fully integrated business. Well, then you're in a situation that I think most American corporations are who are living abroad. And that is that you're running a business, you're trying to compete against the best in the world. Your competitors might be from Europe, the UK, Japan, Korea, China. Your competition is global. But because you're an American company, you're limited in who you can employ and put in your organization, because Americans are going to cost you way more than anyone else. So in that situation, you're trying to run a regional business like that, you can't put your best team on the field. You can't put the Americans in that team that you want. Somebody who has exactly the right experience, the 20 years of the company, you need them in China for a couple of years. You can't do that, and your competitors don't have that problem. Because their expatriate employees don't cost as much. And so you realize you're trying to run a business and your competition is global, but as the CEO of an American enterprise, you can't staff that business as easily as your competition can. And I think that point is really lost quite a bit. And I think the AmCham and corporate America ought to be making a lot more noise about that, because everybody runs into the same thing, but nobody seems to want to challenge the issue in Washington. Yeah, just a third experience of mine is I then retired from GE in 2011, moved from Shanghai back to Hong Kong, and started a small business. A couple years later, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, and embedded within this, John, you know this very well, you had clients who went through this, was the transition tax. So now I'm a small business owner. I'm an American who owns a small business operating in Hong Kong. And guess what? As an American business owner, I'm paying a whole bunch of tax that my competition locally is not paying. I got hit with, I think it was 7 or 8 years of tax on retained earnings of my business. And that's a punishing thing to go through. But what really makes it crazy is you're paying a bunch of tax your competition doesn't have to pay. And that's, now I experienced it as a consulting business, but what do Americans do? Because Americans are out living around the world. We got all kinds of businesses, restaurants, bars, yoga studios, you name it. We're consulting businesses, accounting businesses. Americans are in all kinds of businesses, and the net effect of every single one of them, that to follow the tax law, you got to pay a bunch of tax. Your competition doesn't have to pay. And how does that make sense? It doesn't. So, John, I think in a nutshell, that sort of it captures what the unique sort of position, I guess, I've seen this issue from several different angles. And that I think, if anything, is sort of unique about my perspective.
Yes, and that's true, absolutely true. We've seen here in Greece, especially with new digital nomads that set up small software houses. Before we close, John, would you like to give us your remarks?
Well, I don't think I have a lot to add today, to what Jim has said. I think that his personal story is really compelling, right? Because Jim is able to describe this problem from all different points of view, and no matter how you look at this, it's bad for America. It's bad for Americans. The whole system is completely insane and needs to change. And the only way to do that is to completely sever citizenship from tax residency, get rid of this cancerous tumor, which, this is not novel. This is the way the rest of the world works, right? But I think it's also important as a reminder, to understand how long Republicans overseas, led principally by Jim in the tax area, the tax reform area, how long RO has been involved in this mission. And I think that's, incredibly important. And, I would invite all individuals on the retail level, to support this initiative to sever citizenship from tax residency, remove the tumor.
Thank you, John. And it's a completely, it's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democrat thing. It's an American expatriate thing. We all feel the pressure and the problems. Thank you both for being with us on one more podcast of ROTV. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
John and Jonathan, thank you.